Hi, everyone. This is Don Moxley, and we are here at the Life Over the Horizon podcast. We are excited to have our guest with us today. I want to welcome Dr. Ben Reuter. Ben is an associate professor in the Department of Exercise and Health and Sports Science at Pennsylvania Western University, California. He completed his PhD in exercise phys at Auburn University. Ben has been a member of the NSCA since 1988 and was the 2020 NSCA Sports Medicine and Rehabilitation Professional of the Year. Ben is an associate editor in chief of Strength and Conditioning Journal and has authored or co-authored chapters in a number of NSCA Essentials textbooks, as well as serving as the editor for the first and second edition of Developing Endurance. Ben, welcome to my podcast.
Don, it's always exciting to talk to you, whether we're recording it or whether we're just hanging out and having lunch.
And for the listeners, the reason why I say Ben, I think you may be one of the first podcasts. Your podcast, your movement podcast, was one of the first ones I ever did. Um, and we've gotten to be friends after that. You know, we're kind of silverbacks in the area. You know, I think I started messing around with the NSCA back in 1986. You just read you were a member in '88. And we've been banging around this industry for a long time, both as practitioners, as professors, and as entrepreneurs in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started doing a podcast, which we're bringing back now that I've moved, which I'm sure we'll get into, we're going to have you on multiple times if you're willing. Not because I have trouble getting guests, but I think you and I have interesting conversations and we make each other excited about the profession. And, I was told once by my major professor when I was getting my doctorate, it's like I feel like I'm going to work and play. And I think you and I have had some jobs that are like that and other jobs that maybe weren't like that. But if you find two or three professionals that, even if you only talk to them every 3 or 4 months, it gets you excited about the field. And I know we've talked on a wide variety of things. And I mean, it gets down to, I think you feel the same way I do. You want to be able to do what you're doing when you want to do it and hopefully have a massive stroke or heart attack where you're still able to do those things that you're doing multiple years from now, rather than
Yeah.
saying, God, I wish I could do this, but I haven't done things today to help me tomorrow, next year, and 25 years from now.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we're blessed. We're blessed to have found the ability to stay in our lane and our lane and make our lane something that we love to do. So that's really exciting. So to kind of kick things off, I want to start with this: is that I have started playing a game when I sit around on Saturdays watching college football, and that game is see if I can pick out the strength and conditioning coach on the sideline of the game, because what I found is that they've kind of turned into a bit of a caricature many times. Um, and you see this, and I want to go back, and I was watching a game. This was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I saw what I thought was the strength coach, and I went and looked him up, and I went to his profile at the school that he coached at. And in the profile, it said this person's name is more than just a difference maker as a strength and conditioning coach. He's a game changer in terms of fostering team culture, instilling discipline, and building the DNA of a championship football team. Okay. Now, I read that, and having taught strength coaches and fitness professionals for the last 30 years, and having taught essentials in strength and conditioning multiple times through about 6 or 7 editions, I don't remember the essentials of strength and conditioning, which is really considered the Bible of strength and conditioning education. I don't remember reading anything about fostering team culture, instilling discipline, or building the DNA of a championship football program. So, what are we missing, Ben?
Well, when you were commenting initially, my thought was both with strength coaches and also with athletic trainers, is if you think about it, pick a sport, whatever the sport is, if we're going to talk collegiately or even high school, um, the athletic trainer and the strength coach spend more time with the athletes, probably, especially the strength coach when you look throughout the year, than any other coach.
We sure hope it's the
So
strength coach and not the trainer, right?
we do hope, or in some schools, it'll be somebody who's wearing both hats, which is another conversation of why do we not value these professions more when we consider what some coaches are making in the various sports. But
Absolutely.
you see them spend more time, and everybody knows that monkey see, monkey do. There's all kinds of talk out there about creating leaders and creating community, and I still remember probably the person who had the biggest effect on me professionally was my head athletic trainer in the chair of the department at Gettysburg, Lefty Beiser. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell two quick stories which will describe it. I came in, I got a 1.889 and a 2.1 my first 2 semesters in college because
Nice.
I didn't know how to study. It was quality. Um,
Yeah.
it's amazing how your grades go up when you actually study and read the material.
By the
But
way, I had a 196 my first quarter too. So you and I started off at exactly the same level. But we sure
but
enjoyed ourselves.
Yes, but I still remember sitting in his office second semester freshman year, coming up with classes to take my first semester sophomore year, and him saying, you need to get a notebook and you need to start writing things down. I'm an 18-year-old freshman, or at that time, 19-year-old. And I remember this clear as day saying, Lefty, I can understand how you have to do that, but I don't need to do that. I keep it all up here. And now it's kind of a joke. If anybody asks me to do anything, I say, email me or text me. If you email or text me and I have it on paper or I have it in text, it's my responsibility. If I'm talking to you and I say, yeah, I'll do it, I'm going to immediately forget about it.
Yes.
So that's the one story. The other story, and you and I went to school in a slightly different time. The student athletic trainers, when I was a senior, decided that we were going to have a party for athletic training students. And we bought a really good keg of beer. I think we sprang for Heineken or Molson. That gives you an
Nice.
idea of the times, which is a lot
Nice.
better than Natty Light or Milwaukee's Best.
Genesee Cream Ale back in our day, right?
Yes, the Genesee Cream Ale. And I remember Lefty coming up to me because I was one of the senior athletic trainers, and he said, "Hey, I know college students like to drink beer," and he said, "I know I've at a conference, had a beer with you before when you were over 21, but I know there's going to be students there who are under 21, and it just isn't a good image that." As a faculty member and as an athletic trainer, if I show up and I do that. So it's not that I don't want to be with you guys. It's not that I want to help you celebrate the end of the year. So just please pass that on to the other students. And to me, that's leadership, is leading by example. It's creating, doing things that show that you're an ethical person. It's doing things that you're teaching other people to do ethical things, whether or not they want to be taught, and not teaching it in a preachy way. So the
Sure.
strength coach, who leads by example, who treats the fifth string linebacker the same as the first string, and understands that everybody is part of the team, and understands that it's often not the best athlete, but the person with the best mindset that wins. That it can help them do that. It isn't a skill that's taught. It isn't, and I know for one of the journals that I review for, there's an article in the review process talking about here are some things that go into a good internship. And I think when it comes out, it'll be an excellent article. When it does, I'll send you the link for it. I don't think it's in press yet. But I made some notes when you sent me these questions, and I remember again to bring up my head athletic trainer with sitting for the athletic training exam. He said, it was always taught to us athletic training, and I think you can say the CSCS exam or any other certification exam for whatever your profession is. That's a basic competence level. That
Right.
says, okay, with luck, and I don't say this lightly, with luck, and if you follow these guidelines, you shouldn't kill anybody.
I well, and there's issues. Okay, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. There's
We're not going
certainly
to, and again, I
yeah,
want the emphasis is if we follow these guidelines.
right.
And
And
I can tell stories of getting into trouble with previous jobs where I did follow those guidelines with head injuries, and I was overruled by the coaches. And I think that probably explains why I no longer practice as an athletic trainer. But I think, as you said, these things aren't taught. If you look at the sheer volume of information you need to know to be able to effectively design a strength and conditioning program, not just for one sport, but for multiple sports, to understand the physiological demands, to understand there's a psychological demand. And the key thing, I know you and I have talked about this before, to understand and emphasize that your job is to make the athletes the optimal athlete for that specific sport, not necessarily make them as fast as possible or as strong as possible at the detriment or forgetting that, hey, at the end of the day, your daughter was a college lacrosse player, not a college bench press champion
Right,
or
right.
squat or Olympic lifter.
Yeah, so I want to cycle back just a little bit because one of the things I want to get to in this is that you and I are used to talking to young professionals working their way up in the business, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate their way. You know, some kid shows up for college, goes to a small school, whether it's where you or where I used to teach was a really small school, and they just want to be in the game. They just want to be part of moving the needle for these people. And we start with essentials of strength and conditioning. We start with essentials of sports science. We start with a lot of these texts. Are our curriculums missing something? Meaning that if I think of having been at Ohio State, and Mickey Marotti and I were contemporaries. He was a year younger than I was, but we were in the same program. You know, he went one pathway. He stayed in the business. You know, my old college roommate was a guy by the name of Chip Morton, and Chip leaves Ohio State, goes to Penn State, winds up at Washington, winds up down with the Cincinnati Bengals for close to 20 years, I think. You know, had a great professional career. We don't teach those things in essentials. We don't teach those factors that make a Chip Morton or make a Mickey Marotti. They're doing more than what we're seeing in essentials. And it's leading to website descriptions that say it's a game changer in fostering team culture, instilling discipline, in building the DNA of a championship football program. What are we missing from a curriculum standpoint? Or if we have a young person listening to this podcast, where do you go get that information?
I've got three thoughts that came to mind as you were talking. The first one is actually just came up in a conversation I had yesterday with a friend of mine and a chiropractor and athletic trainer in Pittsburgh, Dr. Pete Thomas. He had a physical therapy or a physical student who was entering physical therapy come to him and say, part of a class, what do you recommend that I do? She thought he was a physical therapist, but he was able to answer the question. And he gave an answer. And I think when you hear it, you're going to say, wow, that's really probably the most valuable thing she's going to get this semester.
Mm-hmm.
He said two things. He said, number one, go to school where you want to practice. Now, you may not be able to do that as a strength coach or as a performance coach, but if you want to work with a specific type of sport, I know you and I were talking about rodeo. If you want to work with rodeo athletes, you're going to want to go someplace where there's a rodeo team or something outside of that. So he said, number
Montana,
one, go,
Wyoming, or Idaho?
yeah. He said, number one, go
Yep.
where you want to practice, and you can twist that a little bit with outside of physical therapy. And number
Mm-hmm.
two, volunteer for everything and everything, not only in school, out of school, everything. Because you get more experience. Because if you're in the classroom and you have the lab and you learn how to design programming, there's a big difference, and there's a learning curve between understanding the one athlete that you can scream at all the time and the other athlete who maybe is a mechanical engineering or civil engineering major who thinks about things in a linear manner. And if you scream at him, he's going to look at you and go, that doesn't make sense. But if you explain it to him in a linear manner, he's going to, oh, I understand. Because there is the team, but the team is made up of individuals. So the first thing is, I think students need to take the impetus, and they're going to say, well, we don't get paid for it. Well, if you're in this profession to make money, hopefully you can
Jesus,
make
yeah.
money, but that can't be the number one thing.
No.
Because the other thing that I've said is, like it or not, what we're doing, whether you and I as podcasters or whether the times you work as a strength coach or sports scientist or a teacher or a personal trainer, is it's our obligation to give people information because they're going to be helping or hurting other people. So where are we missing in the curriculum? I came through the internship in athletic training where we had to get 2,400 hours of direct observation in athletic training.
Mm-hmm. which
maybe,
is
and I know
brutal,
that
by the way.
it was fun at times, and at other times I would say it wasn't.
Yeah,
I took my impetus because I was going to get the CS certification. I didn't know if I wanted to be a full-time strength coach. I did an internship at the University of Maryland before my senior year. I was fortunate that my parents helped me a little bit. I took 2 classes to help with it. And I actually worked as a delivery man at a liquor store in College Park a couple days a week for extra money. So I
nice.
think, number one, we need to encourage everybody to do internships, whether they're paid or not. And there are some young professionals that I've talked to and interviewed who do this because they're like, look, I want to do this, and I don't know where I'm going to get the experience to do this. And by having that experience, some of them may realize, hey, this isn't for me. But the other thing is, the more competent people we have, and I mean not only book learning, but also practitioner, the better that we can do so that it's not just the top 10% or 15% who are making a living wage. Because if you're working as a strength coach or an athletic trainer at a Division III school or a junior college, you should be able to make enough money to take care of your family. And I think
Yes.
that's a whole nother conversation we get to. But to circle back to your question, I think no, for the most part, as a group in education, we don't get that because sometimes it's going to be difficult depending on the school or depending on the certification requirements, to convince students you have to invest in yourself. And I
Yeah.
think as professionals, we can encourage people to do it. We can help them do it. But at the end of the day, it's difficult for us to care about it more than each talking to students at an individual basis. And we can't care more than they are because at the end of the day, what got you where you are, what got me where I am, is because A, we were curious, and B, we took some things we didn't know how it was going to work out. And I think probably the most important thing is we're curious, you
Right.
know. And if you've got a young student who's curious, that makes a big difference. I think the other thing with the impetus with many people today is it's not cool to be different. I mean, I think social media is horrible for that,
Yeah.
you know. And if you get on there and you read some of these things, you think, well, if I'm going to be a strength coach, I have to, walk around in a sports bra if you're a female, or if I'm a male, I have to do stuff with my shirt off. And, you know,
Or
inevitably, I don't know
or
how
wear
you
that
feel about
wear that schmedium shirt. Wear the shirt
yeah,
that's a size too small.
or wear that, or scream, or the thing that I drop the f-bomb as much as everybody else.
Hmm.
But when you start swearing when you're trying to get your information apart, you could say, well, that's just the way I am. You've immediately alienated 50% of your audience. And you
Yeah.
can say that's right, or you can say that's wrong, but there are some people that you do that, they're just going to immediately go, nope, you're out.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. So let me. I'm a back up again a second. So we talked about the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm, and that drives so much in our fields. But listen, we just had a case of a lacrosse team put a bunch of people in the hospital for rhabdomyolysis. It seems like at least every other year we have a college team being led by a strength and conditioning professional that is being far too influenced. Listen, if the next time I hear someone, a sports team with rhabdomyolysis because they had a strength coach that was doing an Army SEAL workout, um, I just lose my mind. Okay, first of all, the thing that you see Navy SEALs do is not training; that is selection. Okay, there's a really big difference between the two. Um, Number one. Number two is nowhere. Okay, let's go back to essentials. Nowhere in essentials do we do army training, sir. You know, to quote Stripes. I mean, and if you haven't seen the movie yet, your life is lacking. Go back and watch. Go back and watch Stripes.
And
But
I think in that one instance, if I can jump in, Don, in that one instance, I know what you're talking, the school you're talking about.
yeah,
I don't believe it was the strength coach. I believe it was a recent graduate who had either just completed or was going to go to SEAL training. But throw that school aside, I can name at least 6 schools where this has happened in the last 8 to 10 years.
yeah.
And forget that school. You're 100%. If that happens, 100% there has been an error.
So the internship that we talk about, Ben, it's listen, you and I both have personal relationships with certified strength and conditioning professionals at a high level. These are people that have practiced at a high level that have lost their jobs because they led workouts that led to athletes winding up with being hospitalized with rhabdo. Um, how does a young professional uh, migrate that territory? Um, and is this something, again, in my mind, there is a huge disconnect. There still is a huge disconnect. Do you see that too?
Yes, and I think I became much more aware of seeing the disconnect, as I think we all did with various things during COVID.
Yes.
Um, I think back to my research class when I was at Auburn, and in my exercise science class, where the professor said, "Look, you have practitioners and you have researchers, and you need one another. The practitioners need the information that the researchers can provide. The researchers need the practitioners to take their not a lab science, or in some cases bench-based science, and say, how is this usable in a practical sense?" And I think this has always been a problem in the movement profession. I'm going to
Yeah.
call it the movement profession example.
Yeah.
The scientists or the researchers and I'm overly generalizing here. So for anybody out there who does both, or who listens to this and says, "That's not me," this is a generalization. The researchers say, well, there's too much practical information out there that isn't backed by the research, and the practitioners say, well, all it is research that doesn't apply. And I don't remember who told me this or taught me this, but it makes sense when you're doing things with athletes, when you're trying training protocols, when you're doing things. The first question you come back to, what's the worst case that can happen? Like, one of the things that's, you see that's very common is, it's like, okay, everybody's got to drink a shot of pickle juice during 2-a-day football practice. This was big like 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
And you can argue about the quantity of electrolytes, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you say, okay, what's the worst case scenario if you're doing this?
Right.
Worst case is probably they're going to throw up, have a little GI distress. On the other hand, if you say, okay, we had a really rough game, and the coach tells us that, if we're saying basketball, we're going to do stairs, and everybody's going to hop up the stairs on one leg, and everybody's going to hop down the stairs in the arena on the other leg. What's the worst thing that can happen?
A lot.
Rhabdomyalgia,
Yeah. Yeah.
stress
Yeah.
fractures, tendonitis, etc. So I think the emphasis or starting point in the teaching, way back when you start doing the beginning classes or the basic classes, is teach students to recognize and saying, okay, what's the worst case scenario or what's the best case scenario? One of the things that got a lot of publicity in the late 80s, early 90s is canceling practices when they came out with the lightning gauges, where they could start measuring how far away lightning gauge. And depending on the school, that might have been the strength coach or the athletic trainer. And initially it's like, oh, no, this isn't going to happen. And then as they started to prove that these things were more accurate, and they said, look, somebody can die from this.
Right.
They could do that. So I think the disconnect is there. I think certifications are important, but there's also a disconnect. This is going to get back to what we started with. There's a disconnect between what you're learning and what you need to be successful in the field. And I think it isn't surprising, because if you talk to people in other fields that require a specific education, great example is if you talk to anybody who's a lawyer, law school doesn't teach you to be a lawyer. Anybody who goes to law school is going to say, I didn't learn to be a lawyer in law school. I learned my first 2 years. Or they took it upon
Yeah.
themselves to shadow lawyers, or they went to law schools where they had to do an internship between the first and second and third year. So maybe the educational process has to be changed where the requirement is you have to do an internship. That might be a starting point. And maybe there has to be specific requirements. Um, I think with the switch that's coming up in 2030 with the requirements for sitting for the CSCS exam is a good start for that. But let's face it, there are a lot of people out there who are practicing as, we're going to call them performance coaches so we don't step on anybody's toes, who
Mm-hmm.
don't have any certifications at all. And they're going to continue to do that, which I think is above us or professional organizations being able to control. But what we can do is we can make sure that the people that we train, the people who sit for these certification exams, that what they do is this is the gold standard. This is what it is. And anybody who doesn't do this, anybody who does these weird exercise programs with carrying logs around and running until you vomit, it's like they're just drummed out of the profession
Yeah.
because that is so far outside the realm. I don't remember his name. One of the people I interviewed was a gentleman who was a retired rugby athlete in the UK who's working as a performance coach, et cetera. And he said, one of the things I take very seriously is not only giving my athletes the best information I can and training them to the best of my ability, but also making sure that I don't do something that's going to create harm, that's going to hurt them as they go the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you can overemphasize that. And I know professionals who have lost their jobs because they have taken that so seriously. And I have a great deal of respect for them. I've had a couple situations where, as I mentioned in previous jobs, which I'm not going to mention, where I was overruled in regards to head injuries. And I basically made the the athletic director sign a form saying that this was her agreement, and I kept that on file so that if something happened, I was able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say this was against my training and my expertise. The other thing that really comes to mind as we talk about this is, you hear so much about imposter syndrome. I have been so fortunate. This is opposite of imposter syndrome are entirely different. But I have been so fortunate to have so many good teachers and people who have interacted with me and said, "Hey, if there's anything I can do to help you," um, that whenever I do something or whether I don't do something, I'm always thinking of, I mentioned my advisor at Gettysburg. What would he do? Would he be ashamed of me if I did this? I really care what they think of me.
Hmm.
I was fortunate enough, for your listeners who are big sports nutrition nuts, I was fortunate enough in grad school to have Dr. Melvin Williams for two
Hmm.
classes. I mean, absolutely head and shoulder. He's one of the people who encouraged me to get my doctorate. These people that you interact with, things that I would do or wouldn't do, you know, I care what they think about me, not because it's like, well, you know, I want them to say, boy, look at him, he's really good. But they put effort into me. They put time into me. They trusted me with things. And the onus is on me to withhold that trust. And I don't know how you pass that on. That's a conversation, but that's something that you can't get if you just say, okay, here's your degree. That's something that they maybe saw something in me, and maybe I was smart enough to say I don't know anything. I don't know. So I'm probably rambling a little bit, but hopefully you can extract something
Well,
from that that's useful for the question.
yeah, let me go back and just characterize. What we're saying is that you need good leadership. You need to intern. You need to be mentored. And this is something listen. My mentors made me. It was not the coursework. It was my mentors. My mentors. I want to turn this just a little bit. So the reason you and I are having this conversation, the reason I started this podcast is because when I walked into the July NSCA conference up in Baltimore, you and I saw each other there, and I had been away from the NSCA for a little bit. I'd been working in longevity. I'd stepped away from strength and conditioning a little bit for almost a decade. And when I stepped back into that show, I was shockingly disappointed by the level of similarity that I saw to the last time I was at one of those shows, which was probably 15 years before that. Um, so and again, my objective with this podcast is to look over the horizon. That's why we call it Life Over the Horizon, to try and ideate what it's going to be a decade from now, so people can start to put their ducks in a row to get there. So, Ben, what are we doing differently today than what we did back when we joined the NSCA in 1986 and 1985? What are we doing differently today that has changed the game? That has really moved the needle. What do you think has really? Because I got to tell you, I look around the industry, I see the same exercises. I see we've condensed our equipment into a single rack. So we used to have a bench press, we had a deadlift platform, we had a squat stations. So we had separate stations for all of those things. Well, we've condensed those into big power racks now. And so and our rooms have gotten they've just gotten an order of magnitude larger. We can handle so many more athletes now in our rooms in these stations. But largely, it's still the same exercises. It's largely still the same programming. As I look at the programming and programming recommendation, I see the same debate going on that we were debating 30 years ago. I've not, and so we can talk about that. But what have you seen changed in the last 10, 20, 30 years that you think has really made a difference in the field?
Well, I think before answering that, when you're saying that, I agree with you. And I think the reason for that is you think about it, if we're looking at college, especially where that's where many of the jobs are, some of the upper level high schools too, is
Mm-hmm.
we are not the leaders of the ship. You are ultimately responsible to, or in most cases, to the athletic director who may have no knowledge or the individual sports coach. And you'll see this coming up in the next couple of months where various colleges will change football coaches because maybe they didn't win enough games, or basketball coaches, or I just saw
Mm-hmm.
a soccer coach was let go somewhere, and the strength coach goes too because the each individual coach will have his or her guy or woman. So I think one of the reasons you don't see the change is because the same thing is, 15, 20 years ago, other than some of the big names, there's not a lot of money in the profession in collegiate setting. We're not talking those individuals who have gone out and become entrepreneurs.
Right.
Um, and in many cases, they can't do what they want to do because they don't have it. The coach may say, "Well, the last place I was, we squatted every day on Sundays," and I'm, just as an example, we squatted on Sundays after the game, no matter what. And you may have a strength coach that says, "Well, that doesn't make sense for blah blah blah." I don't care. We're doing it. And as a strength coach, if you say, or a performance coach, if you say, "Oh, well, tough," 9 times out of 10, you're going to be hauling the U-Haul truck up to your apartment or your condo. So I think that's something that people are working to address, but it's still there. You know,
So let's
there's
talk
not a,
about that. I think that's a
okay.
great point. I think that's a great point. So let's talk about that. And what I believe is one of the major things that has come, and we've been talking about research, we've been talking about education, we've been talking about curriculum, and you can never forget those things. And I go back to my last applied job when I was at Ohio State with the wrestling program. I put together a very intense data collection system, because in the absence of data, you cannot make decisions. And I had a situation, Ben, not unlike what you just. I had the head wrestling coach come to me and said, "I want to put a bench press club sign up on the wall. I want to celebrate bench pressing." And I basically said, "Over my dead body." I said, "We are not doing that." And now, if that's all I had, then I'm probably pulling my U-Haul up. But when I went back and I got all the data that I had collected, and I basically showed, and what we did back then, Ben, was I had my team, so I had a group of guys that were all American or better. So that went from an Olympic gold medalist, Olympic silver medalist, national champions, and all Americans. So I had a really elite group that I could use as a comparison. I had a second group of athletes that had started for us but had never made all American for whatever the reason. And then we had a group of athletes that never started for us, but they all trained together. They all did the work together. They were all very talented kids. But what was different? So one of the things we did is we collected data. So I had managers come in because I couldn't do this by myself. I had managers come in and we created a form where we measured their best set in focus exercises. Bench, squat, cleans, things like that. We didn't record bicep curls or lat pull down. It was the big movements, the big multi-joint movements. So I was able to track, are these exercises improving? Yes or no? And then number two is we ran correlations between the exercise performance and the athlete's status on the team. Were they group 1, 2, or 3? And I was able to demonstrate with statistical significance that a better bench press did not do anything for my athlete. Nothing, zero, zilch, nada. And with that, I said to the coach, if you want to celebrate something, let's celebrate something that makes a difference for these teams, because the coach doesn't get paid more when his team bench presses more. The coach gets paid more when the team wins more, when the athletes are more successful. And this is the thing I go back to. So if you are a coach and you want to run your program, you need data. Okay? And if you are a young professional, this is the reason that you pay attention in stats class. And it does not take an incredible level of stats education to be able to handle. This is basic statistical analysis. And if you struggle with statistical analysis, you go to your business school, you go find a professor, you get an intern. These kids will nerd out on this and they will be your best companion. Run them through your manager's program. These kids will work day and night for you if you do nothing more than give them a chance to earn a varsity letter or wear a letter jacket. They will go bananas for you. So I want to go. I think that's a great point, but it's data. Data is what's going to make a difference, and it's not just did we bench press or didn't we bench press. The question is, are we developing statistical relationships between what we're measuring and the outputs we're looking for?
I think that's a great point. It kind of transitions into, I know, things we've talked about. I know since we're focusing on the NSCA, they've developed the sports scientist certification.
Yep.
And, you and I have talked, I've talked to other people. It's like you could say, well, that's something that the strength coach could do, which you would like to see them be able to do it. And I could play the devil's advocate and say, with the number of athletes they work with and the number of sports that they work with, if they're designing programs, they may not have time for data collection, which goes back to what you're saying. Get the interns to do it.
Yeah.
Or the managers or something so that you have data to do that. So I think the creation of a sports scientist or data scientist or whatever you have is potentially good if it's being used, but whoever is going to use the data needs to understand what it means. So if you're not collecting it and you come to me and say, hey, here's where bench press isn't good, I need to understand when you're talking about standard deviation, when you're talking about R value, when you're talking about, well, we only tested 3 wrestlers, but this is what it showed,
Yeah.
versus, well, hey, I talked to my buddy over at Penn State. I know you don't have buddies at Penn State, but
No.
and we took our wrestlers and their data on these 6 lifts or these 6 performance indicators.
And it may take time. This is what's so important. But listen, let's go back and talk about the process of science. There's a defined process. You hypothesize, you design an experiment, you execute the experiment, you collect data, you analyze the data, you make interpretations, and you go back and you rehypothesize. There is no area in sport that is better for that process than the strength and conditioning coach. Okay, you hypothesize what's it take to be a better athlete. We design an experiment. Here's our experiment. We collect the data. You have to close the loop on this, and unfortunately, most of these young professionals, I've got to believe the coach that has the description fostering team culture, installing discipline, and building the DNA of a championship football program probably doesn't have the data to say, here's what my practices are doing. Because if they did, that would be in that statement. And I think this is the opportunity. So let's. I want to put a pin in this right now. That if you are a professional, I don't care if you're a personal trainer in a club, I don't care if you're a strength coach at a NAIA D3, D2, D1 school, you have access to reams of data. Reams of data. You don't have to have a multi-thousand-dollar athlete management system to do this. You can do. I was collecting 3.5 million data points on a wrestling program using nothing but Google Forms and Google Sheets. Okay. Now, our data sets got so big that I had to use 6 Google Sheets to contain the data. And I had to have an intern from the Fisher College of Business. This kid came in and wrote the code. We built our own dashboards. It was, and it, you know what? It didn't cost me a nickel. Okay. Brought this kid in as a manager. He was able to leverage it in one of his projects. He actually got paid through the College of Business for the work that he was doing. I didn't pay him. And we created these amazing dashboards that we were able to make some very, very interesting observations. So I want to go back and put a pin in the fact that science has a process. Hypothesize, design the experiment, execute the experiment, collect the data, analyze, rehypothesize. This is what's so important. And research is and search. Is to go back and understand what has been done in the past, but it's also to search for a difference. That if you are a strength coach, if you are a conditioning professional, you could be the greatest asset to the academic arm of your school because you get to make the early clinical observations. You get to see this. Then you can go get the PhD students to come. Every school has got a team of PhD students that's dying for a project that they can use for their dissertation. You can have them lined up to your door if you have this concept in mind. Ben, we're not there. We've been doing this for 30 years. We're not there yet, are we?
I don't think we are. I think that there are probably pockets or individual people who are doing this. But the other thing that you have is there's a very often an unwillingness of people to share. Um,
I get that. Yep.
because there's the fear that, well, you're going to steal my stuff. And I would make the argument that if it's good science, if it's good data collection, what's making it useful or usable is you as an individual understanding it. So if I give you my protocols for something, if you don't understand why those protocols are being used, how they were developed, what data I need to collect to continue to progress those protocols, it's not useful. So I am a huge fan of sharing things. I am more than willing to share things with people. If they do it better than me, so be it. Obviously I'm not in a highly competitive football program, but I think this is something that we have gotten away from because there's the fear of, well, if I give Don my information, then he's going to steal it from me. And I think that's the wrong way of looking at it because yes, we care about our individual athletes and the individual sports and the teams. But at the end of the day, if you're in this profession, you're an educator. At the end of the day, we are educators, and it's our jobs, or I would argue it's part of our ethical makeup to share our information so that your daughter 20 years from now can go to you and say, Dad, I can't believe you were doing this way back then at Ohio State. That's so archaic. And you could laugh and say, yeah, I can't believe it either. Look how it's progressed.
Well, yeah, and I think there's two sides. That listen, I am all about trade secret. Listen, and you discover some things, And Lord knows I wasn't running over to Penn State to give them the insights that we were developing at Ohio State at the time. I didn't need to. They were right there. They were right there with us. They were pushing us, and we were running up against them. But the other side of this that I want to put out there for the young professional is the fact that when you adopt this mindset, when you adopt this, okay, data collection, let's get on the front end of this, you're making observations that frankly are 5 to 10 years ahead of where everybody else is at. And even if you share your secret, you've already moved on to figure out where you're going to be ahead in 5 years. Patents, I work in industry a lot of times, and they talk about all a patent does is give you the right to defend a challenge to it. The other strategy is just to stay ahead of the game and keep pushing. So I'm totally with you on that. So Ben, when we talk about this term sports science, what's that mean to you?
I really loved when you gave me this question a few weeks ago to think about, because I think it's a still developing phrase. We are, as a society, we like acronyms or titles. You know, you want to be introduced as Don Moxley, the sports scientist, not Don Moxley, the cool guy, or I want to be introduced as Dr. Ben Reuter, as opposed to this is Ben,
Yeah.
and I think the definition of what should be as a sports scientist is somebody who is a scientist, somebody who is collecting data, synthesizing it, analyzing it, interpreting it, and coming out with information that can be applied.
Yes.
I don't think you necessarily have to have a PhD for that.
No.
I know, if you think about the earliest sports scientists that you and I remember, just outside of academia, I know you started out working in polar. I'm thinking the cyclists and the triathletes with the old polar heart rate monitors, where you were measuring your heart rate and you were going into Excel and downloading it 5 second by 5 second, and then graphing it and say, oh, look, here's where I ran out of water. Look at what happened to my heart rate. So I think my definition is somebody who understands the importance of having a tool or tools that accurately measure things. So we could go down the rabbit hole with that.
Mm-hmm.
Takes the data or the information from those tools and makes some use of it so that you can apply that data or that information and utilize it to progress what you're doing or what somebody else is doing.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I tighten that up. I think sports science is creating data streams that give athletes and coaches the ability to make better decisions. At the end of the day, that's what we're pushing for. And in fact, you talk about sports science and cyclists. I literally, as we were driving back over today, getting ready for this, I was listening to a podcast. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but it was a great podcast, and they were talking about riding the hour record. So it was an English college, and they combined the efforts of their engineering departments, of their exercise physiology departments, with a cyclist that set the hour record, which is one of the most difficult things to do in cycling. And they had engineering they had fiber specialists looking at the skin suits. They had aerodynamics. They had physiologists. They had engineers on the bike, mechanical engineers, material engineers. All these things working together, creating data streams. Because what was interesting is the aerodynamic person was pushing him to get into a position where it restricted his breathing. So all of a sudden they had to weigh the difference between improved aerodynamics and the ability to exchange oxygen and create energy. So this is really cool when this all comes together in that standpoint. So that's one of the things I really enjoy, and I think this is the opportunity. For me as a sports scientist, one of the biggest things I did was I went to the director of the big data program in the Fisher College of Business. I went, and ironically, the guy I go to, Ralph Greco, Ralph had tried to walk on the wrestling team back when I was in school, so we were contemporaries. And man, you want to talk now? What was one of the real cool things was I gave him an early data set that I had, and he went back, and his specialty was modeling data, putting data and then modeling it to make decisions. So I go back over about a week later, and he pulls out this really cool spider graph model, and he says, "This guy right here, this is who we should be modeling." And I said, "Ralph," I said, "the only problem with that is that's the worst guy in the team, and we're cutting him tomorrow." Um, and he stopped for a second, and you watched his brain tick. He goes, "Oh, our data's inverted." So he goes back and inverts the data, and all of a sudden my Olympic gold medalist pops up, and literally it falls right into, and I'm like, yes, now this is a model we can work with, because I was able to take that model and sit down with individual athletes and say, let me show you how you look in this model compared to the rest of the wrestlers, so they could make individual decisions on what they needed to do to improve. And that doesn't happen unless we have visual communication tools, unless we have data to back this up. And that's what became so valuable to us. So that was pretty cool. Now, Ben, when we were at the NSCA convention back in July, I was pleasantly surprised to see multiple vendors of force plates, and I saw multiple vendors of other data tools, whether it's Nord boards or things like um, that was exciting to me. What I don't see is the integration of these yet. Um, and personally, when I think of the conditioning facility of the future, um, I see a lot less power racks and a lot more force plates. I see a lot less, or if there is a power rack, there is a string pot attached to every barbell. So every repetition is measured for quality. And I don't, we're now, what are we, 50 minutes into this podcast, so we really can't go down that rabbit hole right now. But your ability to elicit data, what do you think is a key element? And listen, I want to go back and integrate your athletic training background with your strength and conditioning. What do you think this facility a decade from now looks like?
I should be ashamed. I forgot the name of the title of the article that I sent you, but I think there's going to be, or there, if it works as we would like it to work, there's going to be a lot more collaboration between the medical side, the performance side, and the data analyzers. Because if we're looking at 3.5 million data points on 25 or 30 wrestlers, imagine the number of data points on a women's rowing team
Yeah,
and a men's football team. So there's going to
yeah,
have to be somebody who understands this data at a really specific level, like your friend in the business school, who can then not necessarily simplify it, but rather than give the 100 PowerPoint slide presentation, can narrow it down to 6 PowerPoint slides that 3 of them say this athlete is overtrained and this team has an increased risk of injuries when they do these particular workouts. So it's going to be much more integrative. It's going to require people, I think, to put their egos aside and recognize, like, wow, I didn't learn that in school, or that wasn't what I was taught in school. But provided the tools are accurate and the data is not inverted, as you said, data doesn't lie.
yeah. So the article, we'll put these notes in the show notes. I actually have that article pulled up for us. It's the athlete health and human performance will not improve without transdisciplinary collaboration and data sharing in elite sport. This is an excellent article. And if you listen to my podcast, we're going to address this with multiple people. Ben's just one. Ben sent it to me, and literally this article just blew me away. I'm like, yes, this is what I've been envisioning. I do believe in a decade we're going to, right now the article talks about the difference between interdisciplinary versus transdisciplinary. And for the listener, interdisciplinary is your athletic training group, your strength and conditioning, your nutritionist, your psychologist, everybody. But the agreement is we're going to work together, but stay out of my shit. Um, that's interdisciplinary. I've got my stuff worked out. Thanks. Leave me alone. And frankly, I think that's bullshit, and I think it's a problem. Um, Number one. But transdisciplinary means that we're beginning to share data. We're taking a look at these giant data sets that can come together. And for the young professional, for the strength coach out there, that this sounds intimidating. I guess what I'm saying to you, and I think Ben, you'll probably back this up, as you bring in these collaborators, as you bring in someone from statistics, as you bring in an open-minded person with athletic training, when you bring in, the open, listen, you don't have to listen to me very long till you hear my frustration with the dogmatic nature of these support groups that are around sports and strength and conditioning, athletic training, nutrition. They all have their own dogmas, and the only way to blow these up is with data. Okay, you've got to come to, and this article does a beautiful job. It came out of West Virginia. I think they did a beautiful job on. It's one of the. Listen, I think we're going to look back at this article 30 years from now and say, wow, that's where we really started to see the changes. What do you think?
I think it's a good start. I think the people who are going to be the first ones to do it are the ones who have an ego, but their ego is, I want to be successful. I want to be around successful people. And wow, I hadn't thought of this. The other thing that I think it's going to help with is it's going to help identify people who are willing to utilize information and not just rely on emotion or dogma or this is the way we've always done it. And it's, you see this in the medical field when you get some of these collaborative sports medicine clinics where they bring in a variety of people and they all work collaboratively with the goal is to get the athlete back from that major injury. I think the other place that I've seen it a
Or
lot with,
prevent it in the first place. Just let's
or prevent
flat
it in the first
prevent it if
place.
we can. Yeah.
The other area where I've seen it, although no personal experience, but people I've talked to, is individuals who have had serious spinal cord injuries, the
Mm,
spinal rehabilitation, that collaborative effect, not a stay in my lane, but a more of, hey, our goal is to help this young person or this old person, maybe not walk again, but at least be self-sufficient. And I think when you get to the end of it, it's the recognition, number one, that whatever your position is, it's not about you. It's about the people that you work for or what your goal is. And number two, and I mean, this is going to seem like a very trite statement, but I think it's important. If you're the smartest person in the room and everybody's looking to you for your input, then you're in the wrong room. If you're the
right.
person who walks out, who sits there, I mean, every time I'm a member of the NSCA, I mean, I am good friends with a number of people who work in the administration, et cetera. But I'm a member of the NSCA. I've been members of other organizations too, but the main reason that this has become my main organization is because of the people, the other professionals that I've met. Not all of them, but there each year the opportunity with 5 or 6 people that I deeply respect that I don't get to see, to sit there, not necessarily at the conferences. I was sitting with a good friend of mine who's a professor in physical therapy, and he's going into the tactical field. And we had a conversation over lunch as he wanted my input on aerobic exercise prescription for the fire department and police departments that he was working with. He's saying, can I do this, or what would be the side effect for that? There was no ego there. This was
No.
a guy who was vastly more published than me. Vastly more knowledgeable than me. Every time I talked to him, it's like, wow, that's a really good point. Taking information from me. So I think we're going to see it as a starting point. I agree with you with the article, and the people who are going to be at the forefront are the people who's like, God, I'm just curious and I want to be around these cool and interesting and different things with the ultimate goal that it's going to enhance my ability to do my job. And I know
Yeah.
one of the things that excites me when I talk with you is, just to hear the stories. I mean, one of the stories that sticks to my mind is you talking about a wrestler that just a couple hours of sleep over a couple of nights literally changed his athletic career.
Right.
And, if you're not open to that, you're like, well, that's just dumb. But, 6 hours is the difference between being an All-American and being, well, boy, that's great. You wrestled at Ohio State.
But you need data. You need data, and so listen. I kind of want to wrap things up. We're now, like I said, we've done the best part of an hour. I want to go back and review a couple things. Re and search. Okay, you do. You know what? My friend Sten Stray Gunderson made the point one day. He says gold medal. No, wait. Gold standard research doesn't necessarily lead to gold medals. Okay, those gold medals And I think this is important. If you want to be the professional that helps people achieve at that level, you can't depend on the published research because it's dated, it's old. It's probably 10 years old when it comes out. So the stuff that you're doing in real time, the data that you're collecting is the truest, rawest, best data you can have. But you got to have a system to do that. Number one. Number two, the amount of vomit in a trash can is not a key performance indicator. Okay. In fact, it's an indicator that you've gone too far. And this is what's so important. And we talk about egos and so forth, and they talk about building character. And frankly, you know what? I think that's bullshit. And I'll call bullshit on it. But you've got to go back and take a look at, okay, what are the key scientific breakpoints that we can put in place and how can we see these? You can only do that with data. You've got to have the data pulled up to do that. Training indicators. We're going to talk about this more on the podcast as we go. In fact, I've got a podcast coming up with Sten Stray-Gunderson. Sten is a professor down at University of South Carolina. His father started Be Strong blood flow restriction bands, Jim Stray-Gunderson. We lost Jim about 2 years ago. Sten is the guy doing the research on this now. And we're going to talk about training indicators. We've seen this in cycling. We understand power thresholds, critical power thresholds, the role of heart rate. God, Ben, I've been working with heart rate monitors for 35 years now. The fact that they still haven't been adopted blows my mind. But I still have hope. You know, we've seen heart rate variability really give us a tool for selecting for, we use a HRV for diagnosis of problems. We use it for prescription of intensities and programs, and we can use it for prediction of success. Okay, we've demonstrated that at multiple levels. You should probably get that in your program. But the last point I want to make is that sports science is not about tech. Okay, even though tech is one of the things that drives us, whether it is the catapults or the first beats or the polars or fill in the blank, all those devices do is create data streams. Okay, that's all they do. You already have data streams. Listen, every time your wrestler steps on a scale, you have a data stream. Every time your athlete walks into a weight room, you create a data stream. There are multiple ways to start. And you as the coach, you're the one that has I've got this. I think this is what's happening. You know what? Create a data stream to capture that and go back and figure it out. Get the help from your accounting departments and your business departments to start to figure this out. But let's start to, rather than referring to tech, let's refer to data. Let's refer to the data sets that we need that we can go ahead and build to make a difference. Because frankly, I think this is going to be one of the big differences in the facility a decade from now. That strength coach, athletic trainer, head performance person, fill in the blank, whatever you call them, is going to go back, and each school is going to have their own data sets. And they are going to be unique to that school, to the professions, and I don't think you have to worry about someone else outdating you, okay? At the end of the day, you're going to put your program together and get this moving. Ben, I really appreciate the fact that you called me, I don't know how many years ago, or I don't know if you called me, you probably sent me an email, and said, hey, you want to be on the podcast? And I'm like, well, of course. I'm a 300-pound man. Give me a microphone. I'm going to talk. But it started something for me that was really valuable, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you've returned the favor and come to Life Over the Horizon.
Don, I'm always happy to talk to you, and I'm saying this totally jokingly. I blame you for increasing my data streams from just heart rate to using the Aura Ring and various other devices to looking at how my sleep is every day. So in a semi-sarcastic way, thanks a lot. But in a serious way, you've helped reinvigorate my interest in myself and my health and passing it on to other people.
Ben, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do it?
Easiest way, we're slowly rolling our podcast back out because we made a move to the mountains of Western Maryland. But if you do a search for FITLABDEEPCREEK FitLab Deep Creek, all one word. Right now, we do movement videos. We're going to be doing bringing back our podcast, which we did for about 4 years. Took a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID and then moving.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're going to be a guest on it at least once.
Well, and great information on on fat tire cycling and raising Labrador retrievers. If you're into either of those, you're going to find a bunch of that at Fit Lab Deep Creek. If you want to get a hold of me, you can go to my website, trainrecoverwin.com, TrainRecoverWin.com, trainrecoverwin.com. I host Life Over the Horizon. That URL, our URL is overthehorizon.life. If you put that in, you'll go to the podcast page of Train Recover Win. You can contact me there if you have questions. Feel free. And we appreciate you taking the last hour to spend some time with us. If you have questions, go to the contact form, send them. We love the idea of interactive work rather than just talking at each other. While we love confirmation bias, we sure would like to have other things contributed. But Ben, thanks for your time and have a great day.
Don, you too. Thanks again.
We'll see you.